Now here with the latest evening headlines, it's the ITV News at 10.
The only road to freedom or reckless misjudgment, Boris Johnson's big gamble on July the 19th. It could be a huge day with laws ditched on masks, mass gatherings and social distancing.
To those who say we should delay again, the alternative to that is to open up in winter when the virus will have an advantage, or not at all this year.
But with COVID cases raging and some schools and businesses in chaos, some say it's too far, too fast.
Lifting all protections in one go when the infection rate is going up is reckless.
The final decision is a week away yet. We're due to hear more about school bubbles tomorrow. But there are big questions tonight over the lifting of restrictions when so many are being hit by test and trace. Robert will take us through the Prime Minister's decision. Also on News at 10 tonight. Hot on the heels of its COVID vaccine, is Oxford now onto a breakthrough jab against HIV? Emily has exclusive access. Emma Raducanu's Wimbledon dream is over after she retires with injury partway through her match. After all the sacrifices of the last 20 years, the Taliban gains ground in Afghanistan as NATO pulls out. And lessons in life. Gareth Southgate with Steve on what could be the biggest week in his career.
What would it mean to you personally to lead a team to a Euros final, to be the first England manager to do that?
I think if you're a coach, it's a bit like being a parent. You've gone past the moment where it's about you and it's about what you pass on to others.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. He had said it would be about the data and not the date. But as the Prime Minister set out how he was planning to lift almost all the COVID restrictions in England on July the 19th, he acknowledged that by then the data might be showing 50,000 cases of COVID a day. And he said if we can't reopen in the next few weeks, then when? He talked about balancing the risks and put his trust in the public in finding new ways to live with the virus. It is what many people and businesses, but not all, have been desperate for. As things stand a fortnight today, many of the rules that have controlled our lives for months will go. Social distancing, limits on the size of get-togethers, working from home where possible. Back will come drinking at the bar and nightclubs. Masks will no longer be compulsory, just advisory. Yet Mr Johnson's two advisers, Professor Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, said they would still be wearing theirs. There'll be more details on schools tomorrow and foreign holidays later in the week.
We've had to obey rules on covering our faces, who we can see, whether we can go out at all. In 2 weeks' time, all this is likely to look quite different, as the government announces masks and most other legal restrictions will become a matter of personal choice.
We must take a careful and a balanced decision. And there's only one reason why we can contemplate going ahead to step 4 in circumstances where we'd normally be locking down further. And that's because of the continuing effectiveness of the vaccine rollout.
The latest data shows that although the number of cases has risen rapidly over the last month, the number of deaths over the same period has stayed low. But the chief scientific advisor sounded cautious.
The link between cases and hospitalisations and cases and deaths is weakened, but not completely broken. And we would expect to see some further increase. We are in the face of an increasing epidemic at the moment, and therefore we need to behave accordingly in terms of trying to limit transmission spread.
Despite that warning, all these changes are expected in England from July the 19th, if the government's tests are met next week. As well as getting rid of the legal requirement to wear masks, all limits on social contact will go. The guidance on working from home will be scrapped, and there will be no cap on numbers at events.
Many scientists and doctors' organisations are suggesting that measures like mask wearing must be kept in place in order to alleviate pressure on the NHS. Why are you ignoring their concerns?
I return to what we're trying to do with step 4 of the roadmap, which is get away from government legal diktat to relying on personal responsibility. And I do think that I will obviously wear a mask in crowded places.
The Chief Medical Officer made it clear he would continue to wear a mask.
In any situation which was indoors and crowded or indoors with close proximity to other people. And that is because masks help protect other people. This is a thing we do to protect other people.
Cases in the UK are at their highest level since February. The British Medical Association are among those concerned that the rules on masks are being lifted too soon.
We're going to see emergence of other variants, and unfortunately some of those variants may be more severe than Delta. So it's in no one's interest to have spread of the virus, even amongst younger people. So wearing masks is a very, very simple way in which people have very effectively been protecting themselves and their families.
In Manchester, these people weren't sure about discarding their masks yet either.
Just because people will be taking their masks off doesn't mean I need to. It's everybody's choice, but I personally will be wearing a mask.
Some people could get on a bus and somebody isn't wearing a mask, but everyone has to understand it's an individual preference, isn't it?
I might still wear it on public transport, but the rest of the time, not at all.
In the Commons, the new Health Secretary also announced a relaxation of measures in schools.
On July the 19th, it is our plan to remove bubbles and to end the requirement for early year settings, schools or colleges to routinely carry out contact tracing.
For the Labour leader, it's too much, too soon.
Lifting all protections in one go when the infection rate is going up is reckless. A balanced approach, a proper plan, would say keep key protections. One of them would be masks in enclosed places and on public transport. That's a common sense position.
There is consensus that COVID rates will continue to rise. Restrictions may be on the way out to the delight of many, but the risks aren't gone yet. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
And Robert is here, and as Romilly was saying there, yes to the delight of many, but there'll be very many vulnerable people that will be extremely worried about July the 19th. It may stop them going on public transport. It may make them decide not to go to a supermarket. This is the balance he's got to take.
Yeah, I'm sure you're absolutely right about the anxieties that some people will feel. Let's be under no illusion. The announcement today was huge. No more legally enforceable regulations when it comes to keeping our distance from people and wearing masks. Now, I'm very worried that, on an underground train, for example, or a bus, somebody vulnerable, someone whose immune system doesn't work, will want to wear a mask. They may feel embarrassed when doing so. They may even be bullied by certain insensitive people when they are wearing it. The absence of protection for those people will be a concern. But the risks are more than just that. And the Prime Minister said today that come July the 19th, he expects on the current forecast infections to be running at 50,000 a day. That takes us almost back to the rate of infection that we saw back at the peak in January. And frankly, when these rules come off, infections will rise further. Now, the vaccine is protecting people from hospitalisation, but hospitalisations are now going up faster on a rolling weekly basis, about 25% increases. And that's up from 10% just a couple of days ago. So, people are getting sick. I suppose the thing in a way I found most striking was Chris Whitty saying, he didn't look comfortable through the press conference. Chris Whitty saying that if he was going to support this relaxation, it's only because in the autumn, with flu bearing down on the NHS, the risk of the NHS could be worse. But nobody's saying this is going to be cost-free.
Also, we should talk about the matter of self-isolation. That will be uppermost in a lot of people's minds, whether they've got kids home from school or whether businesses are in chaos. What are we going to hear about that in the coming days?
So, look, I'm being contacted by both businesses and head teachers desperately worried about how their pupils are being pinged, their employees are being pinged, told to go home, told to isolate. Very hard to run businesses, very hard to keep schools going. Now, tomorrow we are going to hear about the end of those exclusions of kids in bubbles. But I think that will impose a big burden on schools because the way to prevent kids being sent home is to test them every day. Teachers will have the responsibility to test them, and they are not looking forward to that increased responsibility. As for businesses, there is an announcement. The Prime Minister has said that if you've been double vaccinated, you won't be pinged, you won't be told to stay at home. But we don't know when that's happening yet. Everybody's not going to be double vaccinated till September. This burden, this chaos, some would say, for business is going to continue for some considerable time.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. And the timetable for easing restrictions is different in each of the 4 nations. You can find out about the changes where you live on our website, itv.com/news. Now, the production of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine took less than a year from inception to injection, but the university's Jenner Institute is not resting on its laurels. Today, we were allowed in as initial safety testing in Britain began there on what they believe will be another landmark vaccination for HIV. Since the epidemic began in the early 80s, around 77.5 million people have been infected with HIV globally, and 34 million people have died from AIDS-related illnesses. In 2020, there were an estimated 37.6 million people around the world living with the disease, and over half of them living in Eastern and Southern Africa. No one has yet produced a vaccine in 40 years of trying.
In this deep freezer is a very small but very important vial that could have a massive impact. It contains an HIV virus, a jab that not only could prevent the deadly virus but cure those who have it too.
Shall I scratch?
Danilo, who's HIV negative, is taking part in the phase 1 trials of the vaccine at Oxford University. He's the first volunteer in the UK to have it.
What made you want to do this?
This could be a way that I can, contribute a little bit to the human rights cause. As we know, HIV/AIDS is such a big issue still.
12 other volunteers will now be given this vaccine, and 150 in Africa and across the rest of the world. 4 weeks later, they'll get a booster, and for 6 months they will be monitored so scientists can assess the safety of this and look at the immune response it generates.
Like COVID, the HIV virus has spike-like proteins allowing it to get into cells, but they constantly mutate, so this vaccine targets the vulnerable parts that don't change. The genetic code from there and other strains of HIV has been put into the vaccine and is delivered via a harmless cold virus. It's hoped it'll prompt the body to make antibodies, but more importantly, potent T cells to kill the virus. Professor Hanker has developed multiple HIV vaccines, but this is the first to use the new technology the COVID jab was based on.
If we focus these immune responses on the most vulnerable parts of HIV, which are the parts that HIV cannot easily change and escape, that we can actually slow the virus and maybe stop it completely from causing the disease.
With 32 million deaths from the virus worldwide and more than half of new daily infections in Africa, it is a global challenge. Although treatment can now control it, it doesn't solve it.
Every part of the world faces different challenges, and there are definitely countries where antiretroviral treatment is not as widely available as it is in our countries.
And therefore a vaccine would be absolutely essential?
Yes.
Those who are diagnosed at the start of the epidemic also hope a vaccine will change the perception of the disease.
I don't think it would mean much for me because I've got the medication, I have a full life. But what I think it would mean is for the youth of today that they are not going to have to deal with, what we dealt with, the fear, the stigma.
This is, of course, just the very beginning, but Danilo and the team here are cautiously optimistic it'll have a happy ending. Emily Morgan, News at 10 in Oxford.
Today was the first day at work for Labour's newest MP. A clearly delighted Kim Leadbeater arrived at Parliament, where she was welcomed by party leader Sir Keir Starmer. She looks pretty chuffed, doesn't she? He was more than pleased than most to see her win the Batley Spen by-election last week, his first new recruit in the House of Commons. Inside, there was the more formal swearing-in ceremony. but as you can see, didn't rule out a sneaky thumbs up to the Labour benches. Miss Leadbeater now holds the seat that her sister Jo Cox did before she was murdered. There was more reaction today to our series of reports on the terrible state of some of Britain's housing and how tenants' complaints aren't acted on. The Welsh Government says it wants to hear from any council or housing association responsible for such accommodation. Daniel Hewitt, who has uncovered this housing crisis, joins me now. So, Daniel, this came out rather quietly from the Welsh Government. What more can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it did, Julie, and it is a rather big intervention on behalf of the Welsh Government. You only have to look at the numbers here that we're dealing with to see that. They've written to every housing association in Wales. They're going to be doing the same for local councils. Between them, they own and manage just short of 240,000 social homes. That is a big chunk of the Welsh population. They're effectively auditing when it comes to the condition of their homes. They say they're doing it because they're deeply troubled, very concerned by the reports we've been showing of people living in squalid conditions, their complaints not listened to, finding it hard to get their complaints properly taken seriously. Now our investigation has focused predominantly on England. We know there are cases in Wales, and what the government is saying here is they want written assurance from those authorities of the condition of houses in Wales. It's a proactive move to say, are you listening to tenants? What are your complaint systems like? On top of that, they're asking for every single housing disrepair dispute that's currently taking place to be given to them so they can look at how they're handling it. This isn't the only intervention we've seen since our investigation. The Housing Ombudsman in England is looking at how widespread damp and mould is. The Regulator of Social Housing has looked into Croydon, and Clarion, the biggest housing association in Britain. Both have apologised. But there is a sense in the sector that governments, ombudsman, regulators haven't intervened enough when it comes to poor housing. The hope is that is now slowly changing.
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed for that, Daniel. Now, the Wimbledon fairy tale that had been building in the minds of Emma Raducanu's new host of fans had a very unhappy ending this evening. Halfway through the second set, the 18-year-old looked like she was struggling and in pain, eventually leaving the court for a medical break. She was clearly upset and didn't return to the match.
After all the anticipation, an enormous roar for the fourth round match everyone had been waiting for. Walking onto number one court under a closed roof because of heavy rain, British teenage sensation Emma Raducanu. Up against Ayla Tomljanovic, she soon settled into her game, fighting off the Australian in some breathtaking rallies.
Oh, this is good. Longest point of the match, I believe.
But it was Tomljanovic who took the set, the first Raducanu had lost at Wimbledon.
That's going to be too long.
There had been high hopes for the youngest British woman to reach the singles fourth round since 1959. Even the Prime Minister tweeting to wish her good luck. And from Bromley Tennis Centre, where she's trained regularly for the last 10 years, there was support with the boss here to cheer her on.
She was destined to be a top player from a very, very young age. I mean, she has that little something extra. She's got the hunger, she's got the look in her eye of a killer. And it was then all down to how much did she really work and how much was her attitude going to sort of be supportive of her ability. And pleased to say it's obviously proving to be the case.
But the second set saw a shaky start for Raducanu, Tomljanovic breaking her serve early on. All was not well, it seemed, 18-year-old Emma clearly struggling. Then deciding to leave the court for a medical timeout. And a few minutes later, the shake of the head told the referee and an anxious crowd it was bad news.
Ms. Raducanu is not able to continue the match.
Wow.
Emma Raducanu withdrawing from the match.
Difficult for
Ayla Tomljanovic paying tribute to her opponent as she goes through to the quarter-final.
Emma must be really, really hurt if, she came to the decision to retire. I know, to play as a Brit at home, it's unbelievable.
And for the crowds leaving tonight, disappointment and concern for their new tennis star.
Absolutely gutting, but she's done so well to get this far. Wild card. Who would have guessed it? Last of the girls.
This year's Wimbledon dream is over for Emma Raducanu, but surely there will be more to come.
And Martha's at Wimbledon. Such a devastating end for Emma. Amazing Wimbledon she's had. What other word have we had tonight?
Well, it's still not clear exactly why she retired from the match. It seems to be some kind of illness
or injury. It's certainly not the end that she was hoping for, or anybody who was supporting her. She had had an absolutely fabulous first week, sailing through all her matches and then crashing out of this fourth round match. But remember, she still is only 18, and this is one of the very first tours that she has played on, so she has done spectacularly well. And to just be able to hold her nerve against some of the top 50 Wimbledon, top 50 women's tennis players is absolutely wonderful. Everybody will be keeping their fingers crossed that this is nothing serious.
Indeed, and cheering her on. Thank you very much indeed for that, Martha. To Afghanistan now, where the Taliban have wasted no time in fighting to retake territory held by Afghan government troops now that NATO forces have mostly pulled out 2 months early. It was after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, of course, in the United States that NATO troops deployed to Afghanistan with the mission to prevent it becoming a safe haven for terrorists. In the 2 decades of conflict, over 170,000 people were killed in the country, including over 47,000 Afghan civilians. And there were 456 fatalities among British forces and Ministry of Defence personnel.
It's only been a few days since the vast majority of American troops left, and already the Afghan National Army is struggling to hold the line. Here in the far north, Taliban forces are on the march, forcing hundreds of government troops to flee over the border into Tajikistan. The Deputy Security Chief promises to fight until the last drops of blood are in his body. The response from the Taliban is immediate. Footage has emerged of government officials rushing for the last flight out of Faizabad as the Taliban closes in. Allied troops are pulling out of Afghanistan after 2 decades of conflict, but are leaving a country where almost half the districts are fully under Taliban control, with their forces gaining power in many more areas. It means less than a fifth of the country is fully run by the government. At Bagram Air Base, what was once a symbol of America's superpower presence has now been handed over to Afghan forces. Much of the complex is deserted, the overwhelming air support gone. But plenty of American equipment has been left behind. The abandoned vehicles are a sign of the hasty exit, which has seen many troops head home for the 4th of July. Only a tiny fraction will remain to the September the 11th official departure date. 20 years after its soldiers first arrived, many here feel America is giving up on this benighted country. Locals like Sharif Karimi, who used to work for NATO, feel as abandoned as the hardware at Bagram.
We Afghan interpreters who work for the British forces are betrayed, and we are left behind to enemy lines. I'm sure that if the Taliban and insurgent groups capture the cities, we all will be targeted and killed.
The Afghan government has put out numerous slickly produced videos in recent days of airstrikes on Taliban targets, determined to change the narrative. But on the ground, its forces face a determined enemy in some of the most extreme terrain on earth. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
Now, birthdays are a time for celebration, of course, and in adult life, sometimes reflection too. Today it was the 73rd anniversary of the start of the National Health Service. So there was a celebratory tea party at Buckingham Palace this afternoon. This morning there was the reflection in a special service at St Paul's Cathedral. Prince William was without Kate for both. She'd been pinged and had to self-isolate. And there was another royal element to the big day, the bestowing by the Queen of a George Medal for the NHS, the citation in her own handwriting.
Under Sir Christopher Wren's dome, a celebration got underway this morning. It was missing a royal guest. The Duchess of Cambridge is having to self-isolate, but they'd gathered here in this great cathedral to mark the birthday of a great organisation.
I am standing here today because of the NHS.
Last year, Catherine Dawson had COVID while pregnant. After giving birth, she had to be placed in a coma for a month.
I look back at this time with gratitude. I'm incredibly grateful to have met and been cared for by such amazing people.
The Queen showed particular interest in the up-to-date equipment.
When it was born in 1948, the NHS was described as a great and novel undertaking, but never has the service been tested like it has in the past year. And so today the Queen awarded the NHS the George Cross, only the third time ever it's been granted to an organisation for an act of great heroism. The Queen wrote to the NHS in her own hand, "You have supported the people of our country with courage, compassion and dedication." The award is for the whole NHS and everyone in it, like nurse May Parsons, who last December administered the first COVID vaccine in the world.
For the Queen giving the George Cross, that was a really brilliant, amazing news this morning for me to hear. For all those people that we've lost, for those people that are still struggling at work, you know, digging in, digging deeper, coming in, showing up every day.
Of course, thanks from the great and good at today's service is one thing, but most NHS staff would also like to see a better pay award than the 1% currently on offer.
You wouldn't expect me to say anything other than I want staff to be rewarded as much as possible. And of course, pay is an important component of that, as is the show of public support that you've seen today here at St Paul's and of course through the award of the George Cross.
Decisions on pay are for the politicians, but the Royals did a royal thing today and invited a select few for tea at Buckingham Palace. Appreciation for some of those who have given so much this past year. Chris Ship, News at 10.
And finally, there were two verdicts today on the England manager Gareth Southgate. One, typically modest, from the man himself as he prepares for his players for Wednesday night's Euros semi-final. It's like being a parent, he told us. The other was from the best man at his wedding, Andy Woodman. He says his friend hasn't changed in all the time he's known him. He's just as he appears in front of the cameras, he said, perhaps a bit funnier.
Gareth Southgate is on the verge of achieving something none of his predecessors have, leading England to a European Championship final. But if he can pull it off, don't expect him to take any of the credit. Typically, he told me today, this journey is not really about him.
It's a bit like being a parent. You've gone past the moment where it's about you and it's about what you pass on to others. And when you're the England manager, you have the opportunity to bring happiness to so many millions of people.
There's a photoshopped image on the internet of you as the manager now hugging yourself as a player in '96. How much of the manager you are today is shaped by your needs and experiences back then?
Well, there's no question that the things that you go through in life shape your character and the way that you want to deal with people.
Andy Woodman, the best man at Southgate's wedding, says what you see is what you get.
People say to me he must be different away from the cameras and the spotlight, and yeah, he may be. He's a funny guy. He's very witty, as you probably see little flashes of, but he's no different, and he hasn't changed.
Southgate started his playing career at Crystal Palace. He then moved to Aston Villa and finally to Middlesbrough. He also won 57 caps for England. At Borough, he was given his first manager's role, but was sacked after 3 seasons. His next coaching position was for the England under-21s, before being handed the top job 3 years later in 2016. Southgate never shies from making unpopular decisions and shows unshakable faith in those he trusts.
He probably sits here and gives us all the plaudits, us players, but we appreciate the job that he's doing and the way that he sets us up and his man management skills. So, no, I can't speak highly enough of Gareth.
In Russia, England's World Cup adventure ended in the semi-final. Southgate believes this team is better equipped.
We are better prepared for this semi-final in that we've lived it before. England matches are events that bring families together, that bring communities together, and they are matches that you remember where you were. And you know, some of the nicest messages you get are that people appreciate how the players have been, that they feel they can connect with them. It's also lovely that, you know, certain generations of fans are seeing England for the first time, and these are their formative memories. Bless them, they think it's always like this. So maybe over a period of time they'll know different.
If you're English, at least, with a bit of luck, that deflating moment won't come around too quickly. Steve Scott, News at 10, St George's Park.
Easy does it, Gareth. Keep it nice and calm. That is all we have for you for tonight from all of us on the News at 10 team. Good night. We'll see you tomorrow.